I'm here today to discuss the history of a condition called CIRS, or also known as Chronic-Inflammatory Response Syndrome.
Hi, I'm Corey Deacon from Nirvana Naturopathic Medicine.
Chronic inflammatory response syndrome is a syndrome where something triggers inflammation in the body and in the brain, and the effects that happen in the brain prevent the inflammatory response from shutting off. It just starts running rampant, and it can actually affect every single system, every organ system in the body. So the immune system can be affected, the liver can be affected, the gut can be affected, the nervous system most notably can be affected. And what ends up happening is a wide range of symptoms can trigger. There's actually 37 documented symptoms of CIRS. Now, the history of CIRS starts back in the 1990s in an area of Maryland called Pocomoke. There's a fish estuary, a water estuary in Maryland that had a infiltration of an organism called Dinoflagellates. And Dinoflagellates are little microbes that sometimes can cause disease. There are certain ones that don't. It's kind of like a big group of species that are kind of like bacteria or fungi, but they're specifically called dinoflagellates. Now, the best example of a dinoflagellate is red tide. If you've ever heard of red tide or seen the ocean kind of glow red or glow blue or green, that's cyanobacteria, but there's blue-green algae. Some of those species can actually be toxic. So what happened in the 90s in Maryland was a specific genus of dinoflagellate called Fiestria got into the fish estuaries, infected the fish, infected the water, and anybody that came into contact with the water, was near the water, drank the water, became ill. And this started with significant joint and muscle pain, fatigue, diarrhea, abdominal pains, brain fog and cognitive distortions, headaches, migraines, and a whole bunch of nasty symptoms that people would normally get when they get sick. The problem was they couldn't find any infection. So there was no signs that somebody was infected with a bacterial overgrowth or a viral issue. Nothing was able to be found, and actually 30,000 people got ill. It was a big deal. The CDC was brought in because nobody knew what was going on. The water quality hadn't changed. There was no other signs of anything that could have been affecting people. Finally, they figured out what it was, and the people that were afflicted were given a binder, pharmaceutical cholesterol-lowering medication called Cholestyramine, which plays a role in basically binding toxins that the gallbladder is dumping into the gut and preventing them from recirculating. And what happened was people's diarrhea went away, but not only that, everything else got better for most of these people. Which didn't make a lot of sense to physicians at the time, because this drug wasn't able to be actually reabsorbed from the gut. It's something that just stays in the gut and doesn't get absorbed into the body. So over time, they discovered it was actually this biotoxin from this Fiestria. And biotoxin is just simply a toxin that is created or released by a living organism. And in this case, it was this Fiestria. There was a physician named Dr. Shoemaker, who was a family doctor. And he was the one who started kind of prescribing this medication and noticing people getting substantially better. But there was about a quarter of the population that over the next few months to years, he found that were affected by this weren't getting better. So they were still fatigued, they were still having cognitive issues, they were having headaches, they were having body pain, muscle pain, joint pain, sleep disturbances, dizziness and vertigo, disorientation, feeling cold very easily, even feeling flu-like constantly, and these symptoms would fluctuate a lot. There are a lot of other researchers around the world researching this phenomenon, and thankfully we now have validated protocols and access to tools and resources to be able to fully understand this. We now know there are over a dozen different causes for this. In the late 90s, we discovered that Lyme and co-infections were actually a trigger for this response. Later on, in about 2006 to 2009, we found that water damage building exposure, at the time we thought, was just mold, was also capable of causing this. So people could get exposed to a water damaged building, move out of their house, change their workplace, and yet they still didn't get better even though they were away from the exposure. In 2016, we found concussion can also cause it. So in my practice, most people with post-concussion syndrome actually have CIRS, and the concussion was the trigger for it. The newest kid on the block now is COVID. Post-COVID syndrome is actually a form of CIRS. We're having more agents that are actually able to cause this issue. Now, the other problem is our modern day buildings. Our modern day buildings are built in square box-like structures that don't get proper airflow, especially into the corners of rooms. And the materials that we use, drywall, gypsum board, particle board, so any wood or material that's cellulose based, that's been ground up and glued back together, is all pre-inoculated with mold and bacteria. So when any of these substances get damaged by water, within 30 minutes to 3 hours, you start getting proliferation of microorganisms. Now, obviously, if we get the material out, we get it out of the house, we replace it, that's step one. But in genetically susceptible individuals, which 24% of the population has these genetic susceptibilities, that's not enough. In 2009, the World Health Organization put in a medical consensus standard on water damaged buildings in order to protect a very substantial proportion of the population. I mean, we're talking about 24% of the population here that could be being affected. So what it was it included small inflammagen or small particle remediation. The reason this is important is when you have a water damage situation, think of it like an explosion. So there's an explosion of all these microbes, and then there's toxins and there's fragments of bacterial cell walls and fungal spores and all sorts of other things that they will actually persist and stick around depending on the toxin and the inflammagen for anywhere from 5 to 20 years. The most problematic is endotoxins from bacteria due to gray and black water damage. These can actually float around. They have a half-life of 20 years. So if there's been water damage that has been remediated, these toxins can float around in the air for anywhere from 20 to 60 years before the level is actually at an acceptable level for the medical consensus standard. Now, the big problem is 80% of buildings that are tested don't meet medical consensus standard. So they'll meet the environmental standard in the United States and in Canada, but they're not technically safe enough for somebody that's genetically susceptible to be spending a lot of time in. One reason why this hasn't been adopted is it's very expensive to do, both the environmental remediation and to do small particle remediation. So there's been some issues kind of bureaucratically in integrating that and integrating those consensuses in. So what I want you to take away from this video today is that you don't necessarily have to have visible mold growth in an area or even musty smells to actually absorb these toxins and cause an issue where it triggers inflammation. Most people are unknowingly exposed. They haven't had testing in a house or in a workplace that actually looks at the medical consensus standard. There are a few companies on the market that you can do simple dust cloth tests and swab tests to be able to tell if these small inflammagens are still persisting in the environment, and then you can properly remediate these. Now, in a lot of cases, if symptoms have already started, remediation is only the first step. So don't get discouraged if you left a water damaged building knowing it was an issue, or you did do good remediation and you're not getting better. A lot of times further steps need to be taken in order to actually get these out of the body and then reset manually the issues that these toxins and inflammagens triggered. So it's not as simple as just getting out of exposure. That's just step one. There are a lot of other steps and a lot of other therapies that can be really helpful for you to get your life back. If you enjoyed this video, I strongly encourage you to share it with your friends and family and anybody else you know. It's really important that people have this knowledge so that they can live a healthy life. Thanks for listening.